Get your lab coats on and let's get ready to do a little bit of mad science here today, because we are going to be taking two of the most dubious gambits known to man, the Stafford Gambit and the Traxler Gambit, and we're going to be smashing them up into what can only be called the new Traxler Gambit. This is going to be a crazy, wild, new kind of opening that you can play, really only for the truly brave of heart that want to, at all costs, play some insanely dubious chess. And just in case you are unfamiliar with either of these gambits that we're mixing up here today, we're talking about taking the Stafford Gambit. This is an e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6 opening, where after white recaptures on e5, you can play knight to c6. Stafford Gambit. This is the one that Eric Rosen has made so famous. He's made an entire career off of this one. It's obviously a little bit dubious. You give up a pawn, but you're playing for this early middle game attack where you're going to be bringing out all of your pieces and trying to put a lot of pressure on white before white has a chance to develop. So this is the Stafford Gambit. We're going to be taking that. We're going to be mixing it with the Traxler Gambit, which is another e4, e5, knight f3 opening. But after knight to c6, if white decides to play the Italian game, we can now play knight f6. And one of the many moves available to white is knight to g5, where instead of playing the main move, pawn to d5, there exists this other possibility, bishop to c5. This is the Traxler Gambit, and this is well known for possibly being one of the most dubious, well-recognized openings in existence. And the main point, although it does look crazy, especially if you've never seen it, you are giving up material on f7. White has a choice of exactly how to do it. But the basic idea is, after white takes this and then potentially takes our rook, as black, we are going to be trying to open up the king by taking on f2 so that the king can either recapture or ignore, because we are intending on, in no particular order, saving our queen, taking pawns, getting our pieces out. Let's just draw a bunch of arrows. You can see how quickly black might be able to put a lot of pressure on white, and potentially this could lead to a checkmating attack, even if we're down material. The whole point is that white doesn't develop the queen side and black plays for an initiative at any cost, no matter what. Now, both of these are well known for being a little bit dubious. This is the Traxler Gambit. Keep this one in your mind. And let me show you how you can actually mix the both of these worlds together into one giant opening. And it can come from the Busch-Gass Gambit, which is another e4, e5 opening, but after knight to f3, you play bishop to c5. Now, previously, we did make a video on this, and we did kind of go through some of the main lines, which are what happens if white does take. And in this case, you can see how some of these lines do resemble the Stafford Gambit. But today, we're actually going to be focused on just one main line because it's so crazy, so wild. I wanted to make an entire video just on this one particular version. And for this, I think we're actually going to need the Lee chess database so we can see what is most commonly played. And the line that we're looking at today is the main line, bishop to c4, not the capture on e5. And now you can kind of see how this does resemble an Italian game. And we can now insist on gambiting this pawn by playing knight to f6. And only after this recapture on e5 now, because of course, why not put some pressure on f7, we can play the ridiculous looking knight to c6. And now you can see how this looks exactly like the Traxler Gambit, but it is different. Take a look at where this knight is. This is the Busch-Gass Gambit. This is the Traxler Gambit. So notice the knight is on g5 and this pawn is still here. In the Busch-Gass Gambit, this is the one we're looking at today, we've actually sacrificed a pawn. So this is going to be even more dubious than the Traxler Gambit. And no matter how many times, this is your official disclosure, no matter how many times I share the evaluation or say it's dubious, people will still say it's great in the comments. This is not objectively a good opening, so don't get it twisted. You will lose. Do not play this opening. But if you are interested, what is most fascinating to me, at least, is that if you do use the database, you will notice that almost everybody in every single line, the main line is white losing. It's white collapsing and falling for all sorts of mistakes. And a lot of them are so tricky that really, even really strong players might fall victim to some of these tricks. That's what we're going to be going over today. I do want to really quick, though, give a huge shout out to a FIDE master, William Grafe, who actually has made an excellent video on this 1 month ago. I want to make sure credit goes where credit is deserved. He made the Busch-Gass Gambit a month ago. You can subscribe to him, subscribe to me, subscribe to everybody. It makes your favorite YouTubers feel great. And I'll leave a link to that in the description, so make sure if you want a little bit more detail, he goes into some of these lines in greater depth. But I just mostly want to showcase all of the tricks and traps that you really might see from your opponents. And then I'm going to show you a game where I had an opponent who did decide to play the main line here, knight takes f7. But the first curiosity to me, at least when I saw this, was, Well, okay, what happens if they just take with the bishop? Let's start here and let's begin our investigation. Because in the Traxler, one of the most well-known antidotes is to just take with the bishop. Now, this is not the Traxler, and in fact, one of the differences, at least the key difference, is this half-open e-file. So in the Traxler, typically, you Bong Cloud, you play king to e7, you move your king up. But what if instead we put the king on f8, trying to say, okay, at some point, maybe we're able to put some sort of pressure on this e-file. And the first thing that I noticed was that most people immediately mess up with white. So this is something, it's one of the positions that can be very difficult for the opponent. They need to find some pretty precise stuff that usually doesn't look incredibly correct. Now, the problem is, okay, white is 2 pawns up. That's fantastic. But you do have to solve the issue that now your knight is attacked and the knight is the thing defending the bishop. So the most logical solution that I think most people would come up with looking at this for the first time is to first take on c6. Okay, attack our queen, make sure you get this knight traded off, and then move your bishop away. And in fact, most people, we got just under 1,000 games and over 500 people, are moving the bishop all the way back to b3. But this turns out to be a losing mistake already. So black can now go on to win the game. However, you do need to know what you're doing. Most people do tend to mess this up in practice, but you have a super powerful move, one that you really want to focus on in a lot of these variations, and it has to do with this bishop. Bishop to g4 is immediately targeting this queen, and essentially white only has one way to defend her. There's nothing else you can put in front. There's no way for the queen to move, so white is going to play pawn to f3. Now, in this occasion, you can win the game by sacrificing on e4. And this is a very kind of dramatic sacrifice, but neither one of these pieces can be recaptured, and we've opened up the avenues for our queen. We're probably coming into h4, but if the situation suits ourselves, maybe we come into d4. Suddenly, we are infiltrating. We're getting the kind of attack that we want. So obviously, you can't recapture the knight because we have this pin, so this would just be white losing a queen. But if they do decide to capture the bishop, you hit them with queen to h4, and now you're in a lot of trouble. You have to play g3, but now after bishop to f2 check, white has a major issue. You can play either one of these moves. They're basically going to transpose. If they play king to e2 immediately, great. If they go to f1, we can go here, forcing them to go to e2, getting that same position where we want to capture on g4. And we win because either white goes back and loses a queen, or white decides to come up and just get checkmated on the spot. So either way, this is an immediate win for black. So that was one of the first observations I made. If they take with the bishop, it does seem like most people immediately go wrong right out of the opening. That's really remarkable. However, most people are going to be playing knight takes f7 by quite a large margin. And this is definitely the greediest. It's one of the most interesting. White is now definitely confirmed going to win some material. Spam risk. I don't think so. And so what should we do in this occasion? Well, again, we can play much like the Traxler Gambit, and we can take right away on f2. And another thing that is a little bit curious, in the Traxler Gambit, the most popular move in this position is actually to play king to f1. In the Busch-Gass Gambit version of this, most people seem to be taking. Either way, both of these are important moves to know about. I did play a game in this, as we'll see a little bit later, where my opponent did take. So let's start first with checking out what happens if they don't take. In the Traxler, this is the most common way. They play king to f1, and they avoid anything that we might have going on. Our main point is we're going to get a massive attack if you do decide to take our bishop. So king to f1. They just don't take it. They don't go in for it. Okay. Objective number one, our queen is attacked, so we move the queen away. White takes right here. Now we're down 6 points of material. White has taken all of our bonds. White's hopped in here. So we have to be a little bit clever. Now, the main thing we need to do is get an initiative at any cost. And again, if you do notice, there's this one move in the database, d5, which scores incredibly well for black. And again, we're beginning to get our bishop into the game. The reason for giving this this pawn up is to bring the bishop to g4. So if white blunders with something like bishop to d5, uh-oh, suddenly your queen has been trapped in and white is just going to lose this game. So what you will expect to see in this position is e takes d5. This seems to make more sense. But now we can hop to d4. The knight here is excellent. It's again controlling the e2 square. So after the most popular move c3, which is actually in the Traxler one of the most popular moves, and this is again another example of what can happen when this e-pawn is in here. If people play just like it is the Traxler Gambit, you can hit them with bishop to g4, and now there's no option to go back and block with the bishop. White was thinking, I play c3 so I can play queen to a4. But guess what? After c6, unlike the Traxler where there would be a pawn on e5, we've blocked the check, but now we're also threatening this checkmate. And this is actually going to lead to a winning position for black. If you'll notice, all of the queen's pieces, all of the pieces are over on the side of the board, and we have lots of pieces aimed at the king. So the only way for white really to defend against this would be to take here, and then computers will find some sort of mating attack. And this is a remarkable situation where we are down 10 points of material and the computer's like, man, you're up 10 points of material. And there's multiple ways of doing it. I don't think you need to go too deep into all the theory here. You can analyze all these lines all day long, but essentially, no matter what you play here, you should be able to come up with some sort of massive attack, or at minimum, find a way to just go and win this queen with some sort of discovered checks. So this is going to be a completely winning position for black, which is kind of remarkable, but that is one of the things that can happen if the opponent decides after taking with the knight not to continue and not to take our gift of the bishop on f2. Okay, so what happens if they do take? I think this is what most people do. So now we're kind of in the main line here. Also, do. Now, we can take here. And my opponent, I did play this one game. He did come up with the main move in this position, which is actually to go back to g1. This is the best move for white. But there are, again, some options available to us. Now, I was prepared because I had just done the previous video's lecture where I knew I was going to play queen to h4. And I knew of one trick that white does generally tend to fall into. And that is white will almost always play queen e2 or queen to f3. They need to defend this square on f2. So I had an opponent that played queen to e2. Okay, and I knew this. I had just done this. I was getting very excited. I wanted to use my one trick. I knew about the move knight to d4, attacking the queen. And the queen needs to go to a square where she's able to protect the f2 square. Now, this is funny. My opponent played queen f1, which to me looks like the most logical move. If you go to e3, it looks weird to me because you're going to get hit with knight takes c2. You're going to get forked. But this is actually what Stockfish wants to do once you get to here. And if you look at it, it's funny. Stockfish just says, best move, go back. Now play knight to d4, and it just wants to go for this repetition and thinks that both players should agree to a draw here. Now, either one of these players could agree, okay, this is crazy and wild enough, I'll do something different to try to make some complications. But it is worth pointing out that if your opponent does get into this position and kind of plays queen e2 and then realizes, uh-oh, knight d4 was a free tempo and a very good square for a knight for black, they may want to try queen to e3. My opponent went back to f1. I played rook to f8. This is still the prep from the last video. And in that video, I had only looked at the move pawn to d3. So I was surprised when my opponent played a different move, knight to c3. And the prep was, after d3, if my opponent had gone for this, I was fully prepared to try to undermine the control of this knight so that I'd be able to take with my rook by getting rid of this bishop. I was going to play pawn to b5, and after bishop to d5, if any other move, I'm probably capturing the bishop. I was going to play this insane move, bishop to b7, offering an entire piece with the hopes that if you take me, I can take your knight. Your queen can't really go anywhere where she's going to be able to defend the f2 square. So this would have been an incredible win for me. Bishop to b7, I would have been a hero. Well, my opponent hit me with a different surprise. Instead of playing pawn to d3, they played knight to c3. So now I had to come up with something on my own here. And what I did essentially was I copied the exact same line as before, only to realize after the game, there is an insane computer line here. So let me show you what happened in my game. And then the very last line we'll look at today is going to be this insane, crazy line that like only Stockfish computer level could come up with. But it's really some remarkable stuff. I just played b5, which is okay. And after my opponent took back on e4, here I decided not to win the game. I have a simple way to win but I did mess it up. This is not a clean game, but to be honest, this is not a very easy opening to play. So this is going to happen. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be wild. Both sides are going to make a lot of mistakes because a lot of these positions don't make any sense and are very tactical. But I could have just easily won by recapturing this bishop. Pawn takes bishop, super easily winning. We're going to be regaining this guy. This guy is also hanging. White is actually going to be in a lot of danger here. But I instead decided to recapture here, thinking to myself, okay, there's no way for this bishop to go. If it moves somewhere, I'm going to be winning this knight on f7. So like if it goes back, I'll be able to capture it and then I can take. There's really nowhere for this guy to go. He can't even go to e2, whatever. And I thought if d3, which seems to be the most sensible move, when I first went in for this, I'm like, oh, this is no problem. I'll hit you with this one. I'll just play this check and then I'll have something good. But then I realized if the king goes to f2, I'm actually the one that's in a little bit of trouble. The biggest thing here is that my queen is now under attack, and white actually might have some time to save all of his pieces, not to mention white will be winning some material here. This is actually a winning position for white. So what I did was I messed up. I still have the opportunity to keep the game around equal. I can play queen to g4. I can even play queen to e2, which maybe would be my preference now. But I made what I hope to call an instructive mistake. I went to h4, figuring to myself, I'll keep control of this square so that the knight is still pinned. But then I got hit with bishop to g5. So this was my game. I had some chances to win, and then I messed it up. And things really didn't get much better from here. I then defended monstrously. I was losing the entire time. The ending was very sad. I managed to put up some sort of fortress. I was hanging in there. I was up a lot of time. So tell me this. You might say I didn't win because of the opening. However, in the opening phase, my opponent had to take so much time that during this phase of the game, the opponent did not have very much time at all. And now the saddest part, I go here. Oh, he made the wrong pre-move and I took this. He had less than 1 second left. And to add insult to injury, white is winning in the final position. Another dirty flag under the books. But I want to show it just because it is kind of an interesting phase in the opening. But if I could relive this again, this is it. This is the craziest line of all time. Stockfish comes up with a completely different suggestion. I played b5, okay. Stockfish says, play d5 instead. This is the better way to play. And okay, d5, not such a crazy move on itself, but the follow-up is insane. Now, this pawn can actually not be captured either way. The main point of what we're doing here is, well, you can't be captured with a knight at least. The main point is we're trying to undermine this knight. So if you do capture with the knight, for example, we would be able to take on f7. And this appears to have already happened because white, in one of these games that's been played previously, thought that maybe there was a little tactic here. Maybe you could do this, maybe you can do some of this stuff. But then sadly, black was able to recapture this knight. And okay, the game went on, bishop to b5. There's no checkmate or anything because the rook is now defending the square. So white unfortunately made a blunder. You can take with this bishop, and now comes kind of another crazy moment. This is super high level players can try to find the absolute best move here. Feel free to take your time, pause the video, whatever you want to do. There is an insane move for black in this position. We are currently down 4 points of material because we're down our bishop. But we currently also have this guy hanging. Yet, we can ignore that is hanging and play this insane move, bishop to g4. And it's in this position that this knight, even though it's now even more attacked, we've put a defender in the way, you can actually not recapture this either way. And our main threat, if it was our turn again, is we are going to recapture here. Like, let's imagine d3 happened. We are going to recapture, and then we are going to play knight to e2. This is going to force you to give up the queen, winning for black. So we have a threat, and we've just developed yet another piece into the attack. And now, just remarkably, all of these pieces are aiding in the fight for us. And you can't take either way. If the knight takes, it's pretty easy. We can play knight to e2. White is going to have to give up the queen. And if bishop takes, we are going to be able to take here. And this is going to be another one of these issues where how do you defend against all of the threats on the f2 square? However, Every time I turn the computer on in this situation, it always gives me like a different solution, and it's always insane. So just to come back to this position here right away, computer thought white was better. Computer thought it was equal. Now computer is starting to think that this is good for black. It gives bishop to g4. And after g3, let's say, it spits out a lot of different things. You could spend endless time analyzing some of these ridiculous things. But after g3, we've at least seen a lot more of these light squares be weakened in the white camp, so potentially we'll have something there. Again, there's no way to capture any of these pieces. If you capture with the bishop, you're losing the knight. If you capture with this, we're hopping into one of these two squares. They're probably both good. Apparently, you can play h3. After, let's say, bishop to f3 is what it was giving now. Some deep analysis could be done here, but I think you're going to find that there's some crazy stuff. Knight takes c3 is the optimal move here. This is, like, ridiculous. Knight takes c3, sacrificing an entire queen, giving this check. The king goes to, like, h2. The king is out of squares, but we've sacrificed a queen. It's plus 10. And like all of this, none of this makes any sense. Okay, maybe we're going to be winning this thing back. Maybe we're going to have some sort of checkmating attack. I don't know. It's just like insane. And you could mess around with this for ages. Also, look at that. Like knight, this was a funny line too. Okay, just castle. We're on the queen. Don't worry about that. Just castle. It just goes on. We're winning. Now we're just winning. We're down material. We've castled. We're just going to win. And you could spend ages here. I don't think this will ever happen in a human game, but this is the new Traxler Gambit. Let me know what you think. Make sure you subscribe if you've made it this far. I would really appreciate it. Maybe we'll get to 40,000 someday. All right, bye.
If you're feeling trapped like a queen, no blunders, only sacrifice and see. Well, you may have the blues. Never be a chicken when you lose.